There comes a moment in every person's life when standing still stops being an option. Not because the world is pushing you, but because something inside you finally wakes up and whispers, "It's time." And that's what this episode is about. There's a version of you I call your future self, the one we talked about a few episodes back, the one trying to break through the noise of the daily life, the one calling you forward with frequency you've forgotten how to fully recognize, the one who's been waiting patiently for you to stop doubting, stop delaying, and start stepping into who you're meant to be. But stepping forward isn't just an action. It's an identity shift. It means no longer being the person who hesitates, no longer being the person who gets ready to get ready, and no longer being the person who holds their greatness hostage behind excuses or fear or someday. Stepping forward means you start living from the higher level of thinking we've been building throughout this entire series. It means you begin understanding that every challenge and every moment of discomfort, every internal nudge, is part of a larger universal conversation happening with you, not to you. Because whether you realized it or not, you've been in training. Every failure, every breakthrough, every quiet intuition, even every moment you stood at the edge of something bigger. And that's what was preparing you for now. And episode 40, Messages from the Universe, Volume 5, Carriers of the Torch, is going to amplify that truth on a cosmic level. But before we can talk about carrying the torch, we need to talk about becoming the kind of person capable of holding it. This episode is your pivot point, your breath before the leap episode, your moment of choosing. Today, we're stepping into the identity of the person who doesn't wait for permission, opportunity, or certainty. Today, you become the one who steps forward. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. I want to talk about becoming the one who steps forward. So there's a moment in every person's life, sometimes quiet, sometimes deafening, when you realize no one is coming to do the part that belongs to you. Not your parents, not your mentors, not the people who inspired you, and not the people who disappointed you. Heck, not even your future self you're trying so hard to grow into. There comes a point where life places the responsibility squarely in your hands. And either you step forward or you stay where you've always been. And for so many people, the moment gets delayed. Not because they're not capable, but because they're waiting for a version of themselves they haven't met yet. They're waiting to feel healed or confident, ready, chosen. They're ready for their fear to go away or for a sign to drop, out of the clouds. They're waiting for life to give them reassurance that stepping forward won't lead to embarrassment, rejection, or failure. But what if the reassurance has already been given? What if episode 40, the torch, the message, the call from the universe, has actually been whispering to you for years? And what if the reason you resonated with your future self is calling is because part of you knows you can't keep declining the call? What if the frequency we forgot wasn't philosophical, but directional, a signal, a reminder, a recalibration? And what if higher level thinking isn't thinking bigger, but thinking as the person you're becoming before you fully become them. See, stepping forward is rarely convenient. It's rarely pretty, and it's almost never perfectly timed. But it is the hinge moment where everything in your life becomes or begins to rearrange. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you finally take the rightful position inside you and inside it. So this part one begins with this truth. You are closer to stepping forward than you realize. You are more prepared than you give yourself credit for. And you have already received enough signals to know that staying still is no longer your path. This episode is your turning point. Not because I'm saying it, but because deep down, you already know it. All right, I'm going to now talk about tuning back in and remembering the frequency you lost. There's something I've learned from years of watching humans grow, struggle, evolve, pull back, step forward, and start over again. Most people aren't failing because they're weak. They're failing because they've forgotten the frequency they're capable of living in. And when I say frequency, I don't mean vibes or mood. I mean the internal orientation you operate from, that inner positioning system that determines whether you move through the world from doubt or direction, hesitation or conviction, survival or expansion. And here's the truth most people never pause long enough to hear. You cannot step forward in your life if you're tuned to the frequency of who you used to be. That's why this episode matters. Because stepping forward isn't about confidence, and it's not about motivation. It's not about waiting for a sign or for things to finally feel right. Stepping forward is a shift in identity. The same identity shift we've been building through episode 25. Your future self is cheering you on. Episodes 22 and 23, the frequency we forgot. And episode 5, higher level thinking. And now, as we prepare to go into episode 40, Messages from the Universe, Volume 5, Carriers of the Torch. They all come together to form this process. And you're not stepping forward because life gives you permission. You're stepping forward because you've remembered who you are. Let me teach you something right here. Your life expands the second your identity expands. Most people want the results of a future self while still thinking like your past self. They want new outcomes while holding on to old frequencies. They want elevation without recalibration. But you're here. And if you've been with me on this journey through the frequency we forgot, if you've leaned into higher level thinking, and if you've started to feel that quiet pull inside your chest, then you already know. You're being invited into a higher identity, not a higher task list. Look, stepping forward is spiritual, psychological, emotional, and practical. It's all of it. It's choosing quietly, internally, to stop living from who you've been protecting and start living from who you've actually been becoming. And that's where we go next. When you really start tuning back into the frequency you forgot, something interesting happens. You stop waiting for someone else to go first. You realize, oh, this part is mine. Not all of it, not the whole mission, but your piece of it. And that's what carrying the torch truly means. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's quiet. It's personal. It's that inner moment when you say, I know what I'm supposed to bring to the table, and I'm not going to shrink from it anymore. People think stepping forward has to be loud. It doesn't. Most of the real torch carriers move in ways others never see. They shift the conversation. They encourage someone who's slipping. They model integrity when it would be easier to cut a corner. They live their frequency out loud, not with noise, but with intention and presence. And I want to talk about you for a second, because you wouldn't be here listening to this show if something in you wasn't already waking up. You wouldn't be here if you weren't aware that there's a version of you who's capable of more courage, more clarity, more steadiness, and again, more presence. Carrying the torch isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were always meant for leadership, but for life, fear, or expectation pushed into the ground. You stepping forward activates people in ways you may never know or get to witness. But that's the point. The frequency moves because ordinary people choose to live in extraordinary alignment. And you're one of them. Here's your first challenge. Before the day ends, choose one action that represents the frequency you want to stand in. Something intentional, something slightly uncomfortable, and something that says, I'm no longer waiting. It doesn't have to be big, because small actions create massive momentum when they're done consciously. And when you do it, don't rush past it. Notice how your body responds. Notice the energy in your chest. Notice the shift in your confidence, how you stand up. Because that's the signal. The feeling of stepping into the person you were always meant to become. This is how you carry the torch. Not by being perfect, but by being willing. I now want to talk about standing in the space your future self already sees. There's a moment in your growth where the work stops being about fixing what went wrong and starts becoming about stepping into who you were always meant to be. And for a lot of people, that transition is uncomfortable because the healed version of you, the aligned version of you, the one who remembers the frequency, they make decisions your current self still hesitates to make. But here's the truth. You don't grow by forcing change. You grow by matching the signal of the version of you who's already living the life you're trying to build. You've heard me talk about this in Your Future Self is Cheering You On, and we've heard it in The Frequency We Forgot. And you'll also hear it in episode 40 when we talk about being carriers of the torch. This is a version of you who already stepped forward, already said yes, already made the call, had the conversation, showed up, stood up, and aligned themselves with something higher. And right now, you're being trained to stand in that space, the space they already occupy. What's wild is that people think this requires massive confidence. It doesn't. It requires resonance. It requires remembering that every time you ignore the nudge, you're arguing with the very future you asked for. Every time you delay, you're lowering your own signal. But every time you lean in, even just a little, you strengthen that connection. And this is where people forget something important. Your future self isn't waiting on you with impatience. They're waiting with recognition. They know you. They've lived the path you're scared to walk. They're not judging you. They're calling you upward. So, as you move through today, ask yourself, what would the version of me who already stepped forward do next? Not tomorrow, not someday, now. Because stepping forward isn't an event. It's a frequency. And you're tuning into it right now. We're now going to talk about the quiet evidence in growth here in part 5. There's a point on this journey where something subtle starts to shift. It's not dramatic. It's not the kind of moment you post online. It's quiet. So quiet that if you weren't paying attention, you might miss it. It's when you catch yourself responding differently. It's when someone irritates you and instead of reacting, you breathe. It's when you start showing up on days you normally would check out. It's when you no longer need permission to be who you know you're becoming. That quiet evidence, that's growth. That's the frequency settling into you, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. A lot of people think change is supposed to feel like fireworks, but the real transformation is usually a soft click inside your soul. You're the only one who hears it, though. You're the only one who knows it happened, but you feel it, and that feeling is everything. Look, part of stepping forward, part of becoming the one who steps forward, is understanding that the world may not immediately applaud your growth. You won't always get recognition. And you won't always get validation. But if you're listening closely, you'll notice something better. You're no longer abandoning yourself. You're choosing the version of you that's trying to rise. You're choosing the person your future self has been cheering for. You're choosing the frequency you forgot, and now you're choosing it again and again in real time. This is where the higher level thinking process becomes practical. This is where alignment becomes behavior. This is where the gap between who you were and who you're becoming starts to close. And I want you to pay attention to that gap this week, because the smaller it gets, the louder your life begins to speak. Not noise, but clarity. Your thoughts sharpen. Your decisions simplify. Your purpose gets louder without you forcing it. Remember, growth isn't loud, but it is undeniable. And if you've been listening closely during this episode, you might notice it's already happening in you. Here in part 6, I want to talk about staying in alignment when the world pulls you off course. There's another moment in everyone's growth where the real test begins. Not when you start something new, but when life tries to pull you back into the old frequency you've already outgrown. Maybe it's the familiar frustration, the old insecurity, the version of you that wants to shrink, stay silent, or let someone else step forward instead. And this is where most people forget something powerful. You don't lose the frequency because you're weak. You lose it because you stop noticing how often the world tries to tune you back to the old station. Alignment isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. It's a conversation with yourself. It's what you do when nobody's applauding, when nobody's listening, or when nobody's checking on your progress. And this is the part that separates torch carriers from torch watchers. Torch watchers admire the light. Torch carriers regenerate the light. They stay aware. They stay intentional. And they stay in the room with themselves even when it's uncomfortable. So, let me talk to you like it's just you and me in this very moment. If you feel yourself slipping back into the old frequency, if you catch yourself dimming again, if you feel the pull of older versions of you trying to reclaim the wheel, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're evolving. The test isn't whether you stay perfect or aligned. The test is whether you notice the drift and then choose to return. That's what stepping forward actually looks like. The willingness to return again and again and again. And here's your third challenge. Today, pay attention to one moment where you feel yourself slipping back into the frequency you've already outgrown, whether it's doubt, fear, hesitation, shrinking, or old habits. When you notice it, pause for 3 seconds. Take a breath. And choose the newer frequency instead, just once and on purpose. That single moment of return, that's the muscle being built. and that's the torch staying lit. I would like for you to remember something. Stepping forward isn't an act. It's your new baseline. And we're going to talk more about that here in part 7. By now, you've probably noticed something shifting inside you. Not because of anything dramatic, but because you've been paying attention. You've been tuning back into the frequency you forgot. You've been carrying your torch with more intention. And now, we reach the part of the journey where stepping forward becomes less of a choice and more of your natural state. Stepping forward isn't a heroic pose. It's not a cinematic moment. It's the quiet agreement you make with yourself that you will not shrink in the places your soul is asking you to grow. It's the decision to stay awake, stay responsible, stay aligned. Even when it would be easier to fall back into your old patterns, old doubts, old versions of you that can no longer carry who you're becoming. You've been doing the work. And here's the truth most people never hear. Stepping forward is not about walking into something new. It's about returning to who you were always capable of being. That's why your future self is cheering you on. They already know what you look like on the other side of hesitation. They've already seen you take ownership of your internal frequency, and they've already watched you lead, influence, heal, and rise in ways that ripple far beyond you. And as we move forward toward episode 40, Messages from the Universe, Volume 5, Carriers of the Torch, I want you to understand why this matters. This episode wasn't designed to hype you up. It was designed to recalibrate you, to help you remember that when you step forward, you're not stepping alone. You're stepping into a current that countless others feel, respond to, and draw strength from. You're becoming the carriers, one of the transmitters, one of the people who help elevate the collective, even if you never see the full impact. So here's a quick recap. You remembered the frequency. You tuned back in. You carried the torch. You stretched yourself. You aligned your choices. And now you stand here, more awake, more aware, and more capable of stepping into what comes next. You're not waiting for a sign because you are the sign. You're not hoping someone steps forward. You are the one stepping forward. And the next episode, we're going even higher. As we close the show, I want to leave you with this message. You've spent this episode exploring something most people never slow down long enough to feel. The truth that you're not waiting for a sign. You are the sign. You are the one who steps forward, not because life is easy, but because your life is asking you to rise to the person you've always known yourself to be. And if you felt something shifting in you during this episode, good. That's you tuning back into the frequency you forgot. And that's the same frequency your future self has been cheering for and calling out to you from the version of your life that's already more grounded, more courageous, and more awake. Every step you take from here is part of that alignment. Every choice you make in the next 24 hours is part of that unfolding. And when you feel yourself hesitate, remember this. You're not stepping into the unknown. You're stepping into the person you've been growing toward the entire time. And now, we're ready for what's next. Because episode 40 is not just another chapter. It's Messages from the Universe, Volume 5, Carriers of the Torch. And after everything we've explored today, you're ready for it. That episode isn't simply meant to be heard. It's meant to be received. And it's meant to be carried. So take a breath. Hold the lessons from today close. And as you move through the rest of your day, your week, your life, remember, you're not following the light anymore. You're carrying it. And the world is brighter because of it. I want to thank you again for joining me, hanging out with me, and going on this journey with me once again. If this episode resonated with you and you think somebody else can benefit, feel free to share it with them. Remember, it's free. And until next week, thanks again and have a great week.